Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net. Welcome to this special edition of Windows on the World. This is an interview with Barbara McKenzie from New Zealand, and we're going to be talking about the Global Action Plan, which includes COVID-19. We're going to be going back to the start of where a lot of this came from, and we've covered it in many previous shows. We're talking about United Nations Agenda 21, now Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals. And all this started in the 80s. 1987, a document came out called Our Common Future. By the early 90s, what we saw was steering groups such as the Club of Rome saying that climate change was going to be the new driver of the global agenda, which indeed it turned out to be. Now, of course, we have pandemics. They're all drivers of change. The change is this technocratic system. Now, where did this all come from? Let's just give you some quotes as to how it all got going. A lot of people can't get their heads around this because it's such a global structure, but it's unstructured in the eyes of the public. So what basically happened was banks, corporations got together and they all worked together under a thing called sustainable development. Now, if we go back to Our Common Future in 1987, which was a document which was co-authored by Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was at the time the Prime Minister of Norway, and also she's now part of this thing called the Elders, and she's one of the elder statesmen of Agenda 21. She was a member of the World Communist Party. It all gets quite complicated when we start looking at the figures in this, but if we can keep it very simple, she co-authored this document called Our Common Future, and it really describes this new government system. Here's a quote from it. How are individuals in the real world to be persuaded or made to act in the common interest? The answer lies partly in education, institutional development, and, wait for it, law enforcement. Most important, effective participation in decision-making processes by local communities can help them articulate and effectively enforce the common interest. Get that? Enforce the common interest. The world must design strategies that will allow nations to move from present destructive processes of growth onto sustainable development paths. This will require policy changes in all countries. And of course, that's what happened through the Rio Conference of 1992, where most countries in the world signed up for their government to be under the sustainable development programs, which they say are non-binding, but it becomes binding because then it goes into all local legislation through the climate change agenda. And what we see now is a furthering of that agenda. I'm just going to give you another quote because we're living under a system now called communitarianism, and I've adequately described the main tenets of it there. In other words, you have a totalitarian system which is run through a technocracy, but it masquerades as a community from global to local. So again, we have this idea of local communities. We need to help them articulate and effectively enforce the common interest. So in other words, you have one choice, no choice. Communitarianism is about demonizing everything outside the official narrative. And most countries have been changed, the UK in particular, but we see this everywhere. Some people call it cultural Marxism, but it's actually communitarianism. It's an updated version of communism. One of the main voices behind communitarianism is Amitai Etzioni, who was born Werner Falk. Amitai Etzioni is an advisor to the American government and has been for a very long time. He's at the George Washington University and is the director of the Institute of Communitarian Policy Studies. He's a professor of international relations and a founding director of the Institute. Yeah, after 9/11, this is very interesting because this is the person who's behind a lot of the communitarian philosophy and policies in what he calls the responsive community. After 9/11, Amitai Etzioni called for the bombing of Iran and the destruction of their infrastructure so they may not develop nuclear weapons, which is actually rather hypocritical, but typical of the communitarian mindset. And we're going to get onto talking about this tonight and how it's affecting people down under in New Zealand, actually. My guest tonight is Barbara McKenzie. I've been in touch with Barbara for quite a few years. She came on several shows, I think, when I was on the Republic Broadcasting Network. And she has direct interface with Agenda 21 policies, which are all coming in through COVID-19. Basically, we are going into a totalitarian system which masquerades as a global community. That sums it up quite simply. So I'm going to bring Barbara in now. Barbara, hi.
Hi, Mark.
I just gave a little introduction about what we're going to be talking about, which is the Agenda 21 implementations and how people can get to notice this. We're in a very late stage of it now. I think we're in the final act of the completion of this technocratic system, and most people can now see what's going on. I've been talking about it for about 15 years. It was a kind of thing that was in the background to most people because it didn't directly affect them, but now it's really affecting everybody. So maybe you could introduce yourself, because we've done several shows together and you became aware of these global policies being acted out and imposed at a local level. So just introduce yourself.
Oh, hi. Well, Agenda 21 was something that affected the rest of the world, not me. But I became interested and became involved in what was going on because I was following the Syrian war. And then, sorry, this is, and I was looking for, you know how left-wing groups are always very pro-war, or
Yes,
very pro. And
absolutely.
so
Well, we can see
I
that with the
was,
Biden administration now. That's a great
I
example.
was
Yeah.
investigating something called Hope Not Hate.
Well, I've
You
been a
know,
victim of them.
yes. Well, and so I came across Windows on the World, and then
Through Hope Not Hate. That's brilliant. Yeah. Well, we get a lot of listeners through Hope Not Hate. Is this organization in the UK, which is basically an arm of the intelligence services. It's a bit like a sort of, I would say, retarded version of MI5, but they're very nasty, and they go after anybody who goes against the official narrative or anybody who criticizes Israel. But basically,
yes,
they are just a kind of British intelligent attack group, and they're actually a
yes.
charity, but they're a very
Well, they're a bit of
despicable
they're a bit of a Wars
organization.
for Israel group, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I was looking for stuff on because they wanted to do a Libya on Syria. You know, they supported that. So anyway, I found my way to you, and then you. I'm sure this is where I first heard about Agenda 21, and I became very interested. I was very interested in the American Wildlands Project, which is all about rewilding most of the country and forcing people into into high density living. Okay, and so everybody's got a right to roam apart from humanity. And then and then so I was going to write about it because I was all worried about America and Americans. And then I got the letter. You know, it came to our town, it came to our street. You know, and our city council wants to do a wildlands on our capital city. So I mean, I don't know. It's all very well caring about the environment and preserving virgin forest, etc. How does that get translated into we want to rewild your back garden?
Well, exactly. Now, this is what's interesting about it, because most people don't get this. And once you get it, it's really easy to see. Basically, we're talking about policies that are enacted all over the world, in every country, and they all come through local councils. There's a thing called ICLEI, which is basically Local Government for Sustainable Development. It has a rather long title. And that's the thing about these organizations. What happened after Rio, the Rio Earth Summit of 92, was that hundreds of organizations and NGOs all came under this umbrella of sustainable development, and it grew and grew and grew. So what you've basically got is an infiltration process that's global. So every country has these organizations to one extent or another. In other words, in some countries, it's more embedded than in others, but it's present everywhere. Once you know what you're looking for, you can look for the habitat conferences, you can look at these initiatives of the UN, and people think of the UN as this peacekeeping force. But the point is that they are an unstructured global governance. In their latest paper, which they put out recently, called Our Common Agenda, which is a follow on from Our Common Future of 1987, it all goes one way. They're actually calling for global control of all media through the UN. It's incredible, isn't it?
Well, and just yes, just the with regard to this global to local, the funny thing about this significant natural area policy, which is what we're having, which is what our council is implementing, and councils coincidentally are implementing it throughout the country, but there's no legal path to it. And the only thing I could find, and I went back, and it's not there in the relevant legislation that they quote, not at all. And I went back, and all I could find was UN documents on biodiversity, biological diversity, and the agreement on biodiversity, and so there's been conversations going on in the background. That's what that we don't know
Yeah.
anything about.
Exactly. So this is a little preview of a much longer interview where we're going to get really in depth on this. And if people can subscribe to us on Spreaker, which is at windowsontheworld.net, our Sunday shows go out there. This will be on Spreaker as well, this extended interview. Also Odyssey, and the links to that are on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. We do not use YouTube anymore. We're currently on a ban from YouTube, and I'm sure it'll happen again. So please subscribe to us on those platforms. So what this is basically a little trawl through and an introduction to what we're going to be talking about, which affects everybody. And this is very interesting because Barbara has managed to identify these policies locally and now is in possession of the bigger picture. And that is a very important place to be at this moment in time, because COVID is also a driver of the Sustainable Development Goals, right?
Yes.
Yes. So, Barbara, tell us a little bit about how you kind of identified what was going on. Give us a few more examples of what was happening locally.
What we're looking at really is the dismantling of all aspects of New Zealand economy, New Zealand society, New Zealand traditions. Of course, the zero carbon and zero COVID, of course, represent a huge assault on the economy, and which nobody's allowed to talk about. There's a cartoon, a Jacinda cartoon. There's probably several on the same theme, which has her stomping on a carcass of something or somebody labelled the economy. And I thought I detected signs of life. And that's what it feels like to anybody watching. The whole conversion of the wholesale conversion of farmland to forestry, and inevitably that has huge, apart from economic, that has huge environmental implications, impoverishing the soil and providing a hostile environment to flora and fauna. But at the same time, it's an attack on the food supply, which we know is one of the goals. And also at a social level, everything is weaponized. Age, race, gender orientation, biodiversity, and the idea, is to create division and suppress dissent. If you dissent at all with any policies, I mean, if you query the remaking of our cities into apartments and biodiversity, then you're a selfish old person, So everything is weaponized, and if you disagree, you're full of hate, and of course the idea is to create hatred and division. So it's all on, really.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday, 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net.